What's up, everybody? My name is Isaac Huss, and today I'm going to talk about whether it's better preparation for marriage if men live alone or live with roommates. Live long enough as a single man and people are bound to give you some free advice, and particularly about your living arrangements. In fact, just last week I met somebody new who, in the first 20 minutes of conversation, offered that since I'm in my 30s, I'd better be living by myself by now. I'd been wondering aloud what to do with my next lease, and I was remarking about how I was tempted to find a roommate this time because, let's be honest, you just can get so much more space. You can get a nicer home. You can have more choices in terms of which neighborhoods to live in if you have someone else splitting the rent. Which led her to even remark that, yeah, particularly in New York City where she lives, that you can just get much more bang for your buck if you are living with somebody else. Which, of course, didn't prevent her from saying that, yeah, but it's not suitable for a man of my age. I've heard some women go even further with this and say they wouldn't even date a man who wasn't living by himself because, let's face it, it shows a level of self-sufficiency, a level of responsibility, a level of accountability, you might even say, that would bode well when entering into a serious relationship with someone. And frankly, if someone wasn't already doing that, then they probably didn't have what it takes. On the other hand, there's not just mere practicalities in favor of living with roommates before you get married. In fact, I've actually written about the particular benefits of living with roommates as it relates to living in harmony with other adults under the same roof. Because, let's be real, marrying someone means you're signing up for a roommate for life, whether you like it or not. It's safe to say you can make an argument on both sides of the equation. But which side has the better argument? Let's dive deeper, shall we, into whether it's better for a man to live alone or with roommates with a future marriage in mind. Is it good for man to be alone? Well, the short answer, of course, is no, and we hear that from Genesis, and that rings true in my own life. It is bad for us to be alone. It is good for us to live in community. The particular question for this video, though, is it good for man to live alone at his own address? Perhaps the best argument I've heard for living alone is that it proves that you're capable of living alone. But, of course, just because you're capable of doing something doesn't mean that you should be doing something. So, should you live alone when you know that you can? Well, here's an example from my own life. About 5 years ago, I decided to move into a home with 3 other Catholic dudes. I liked them, we got along, we were all going to Mass, we all lived a generally good Christian moral life. But there was a varying level of ages that was not insignificant. Our schedules were different, and frankly, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff that we did together. There wasn't much of real community. Meanwhile, rents were going up, and one roommate in particular wanted to be able to plan for the future as he was thinking about marriage himself. So he wanted a commitment a good 4 to 5 months before we really did need to commit to a new lease. And for me, there was enough unknowns about whether this is a good situation for me that I decided to opt out myself. I liked the idea of living by myself for the first time, but I also really valued my experiences of living in community with roommates. So I did some due diligence and ultimately decided there wasn't really a good roommate situation for me at the time, and I decided to live on my own. It was very edifying for me to do this, actually. It was very good for me to realize that, yeah, I could do this for myself. I believed in myself, but it's a whole nother thing to actually do it and to succeed in doing it. I was self-sufficient for truly the first time and not accountable to anyone else, even if it was just simply a lease that we shared together. It was also quite freeing because I knew that I could do that again if need be, even if I did eventually go back to roommates. But it was also motivating because I knew it was a lot of hard work that led to that moment of self-sufficiency, and I was motivated to not only keep that going, but also do what I could to advance my career and progress financially. But it also had its drawbacks. I did develop some bad habits, if nothing else because there was no one around to see my bad habits. And it's expensive. And I'm not sure I had any idea how much furniture cost, even one couch. And then along came this little thing called a pandemic. and I'm not exaggerating when I say that the spring of 2020 was the most lonely time of my life, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. But it became clear that living alone had much more far-reaching consequences than I could have predicted. Now, I certainly hope that we don't have any pandemics coming down the road anytime soon, but there are simply things that you can't predict that happen in the world around you or to yourself that make living alone much more difficult and living with roommates much more valuable. For instance, back to that house where I was living with those 3 other guys. I had to undergo a knee surgery, and I'm not sure that I could go through that debilitating and arduous rehabilitation process without those other guys to lean on, figuratively and literally. So what's wrong with having roommates anyway? Going back to the intro, I detailed 2 specific benefits to having roommates: the community aspect and the practicality aspect. Well, it is true that both of those things can actually be drawbacks as well. The old proverbial double-edged sword, if you will. What could be wrong about community? Well, sometimes communities can become insular, and in particular built-in communities like roommates. For instance, if you live with your best friends, you don't feel the same level of need to go out and make new friends, for instance, or otherwise expand your network, which of course isn't necessarily the end of the world, unless you do need to find a new relationship, namely a marriage. And if you're not putting yourself out there, what are you, just expecting her to show up at your door? Roommate relationships can also serve to enable each other. For instance, my favorite roommate of my whole life, Anders, we lived together for 5 years, and he watched a lot of TV, which meant I watched a lot of TV. In fact, probably more in those 5 years than I have in my entire adult life, and maybe twice over. And no, we weren't watching the documentaries on the Eucharistic miracles, if you catch my drift. Suffice it to say, new vices can develop while old ones fester, while new virtues are left untested and consistent virtues may wane. I had one roommate, again, I really liked the guy, I enjoyed living with him, but he had this habit of throwing his mail in a pile on the kitchen table and then ignoring it, which on the one hand meant we couldn't use our kitchen table, and on the other hand, it meant he wasn't reading his mail. And I, for whatever reason, thought that that was a good idea too. So there I went, throwing my mail on this pile. We had a pretty impressive pile of mail, and we also had a pretty impressive set of correspondence that might have been important. In fact, there was one particular piece of mail that contained my new insurance enrollment, which I then missed the deadline on simply because I didn't open it. That might sound ridiculous, but we can all relate to something that came up in our lives with roommates that we just kind of did because it was comfortable, or that's what the other guys were doing, or we liked each other, so who really cared if nobody did the dishes? And even if you're not developing any particularly bad habits, it can simply become too comfortable and inhibit other areas of your life. One way this happened in my own life is I noticed that my ambition was lacking, particularly in my 20s. I was paying pretty low rents, in part because I had to. I was working as a Catholic school teacher and my salaries were very low. But because I was able to secure these low rents, I didn't feel the need to work during the summer, for instance, more than the bare minimum. And I certainly didn't feel the need to progress my career like I might otherwise would have if my budget was tighter. Put simply, I became stagnant professionally simply because I could. Going back to those other 3 guys, though, that I lived with, it was simply because I was uncomfortable in my living arrangement with them that I decided a change needed to happen. And that required some motivation. It required some organization. It required some responsibility on my part to move out of that place, find a new place, and to start all over on my own. So, which way, young man? Well, part of what makes this conversation so fascinating to me is that I have significant experience now in both the roommate situation and also living alone. And I've benefited from both, but I've also seen the downsides of both, and even in the lives of other people. I do think that living with other dudes that you like, that you enjoy hanging out with, and especially if you have a shared sense of mission together, well, that was some of the most rewarding experiences of my life, and frankly, I cannot recommend it enough. But of course, not all roommate situations are created equal. And that's not even to say that all roommate situations, even the best ones, don't have an expiration date to them. I also know for me in particular that I made huge strides as a man when I decided to live on my own, both in what it took to get there and also once it became a reality. And this is why I think that the question ultimately falls to the individual, and in particular what sort of state in life he's in. When you're just out of college or otherwise just starting your first full-time job, those are the prime years to get roommates. It's important to forge bonds with other men in your life, and particularly though in that stage of life where you're just starting out. You've left your family of origin, you're deciding on your own and on your own terms what kind of man you want to be, and yet no man is an island and no man can do that himself. And let's be real, it's also fairly rare to make enough money on your first ever paycheck to be able to afford a nice home on your own. So that means these can be not only just an impractical time to try to live on your own, but it also can just be a great opportunity to start to save some money, to start to learn how to invest your money, to start to figure out how to make sure that you have financial stability and growth that's sustainable for the future, which of course is of the utmost importance when you're looking to get married and to start a family. So, in other words, to me, it's a no-brainer to start this adult, self-sufficient life of yours with roommates, so long as you are striving to also be as self-sufficient as possible at the same time. Because let's be real, roommates do come and go, and eventually you're going to have to fend for yourself sooner rather than later, and you want to be prepared for that. Eventually, you will run out of good roommates that can provide more than just a base level of camaraderie and practicality in a living arrangement. And at a certain point, it will probably make pragmatic sense to find a place on your own, and that can be a good thing. But in my experience, apples to apples, a good roommate experience, and again, that's one where you actually like each other, you like spending time with each other, even when you don't have to. When you're helping each other grow in virtue and eliminate vice. When you're thinking about the future, both financially but also in terms of vocation, those benefits that come from that sort of living arrangement far outweigh any alternative benefits to living by yourself. And frankly, I'm willing to bet your future wife will agree. All right, that's all I got for today. But what did you think? I'd love to hear your reaction to what I said about the pluses and minuses of living with a roommate, living with yourself. How did you maybe discern in your own life? Maybe you learned the hard way. Maybe you have some advice on how to choose a new roommate and where to find them in a world where sometimes it can be hard to find good friends, much less people you want to live with. That's what that comment section below is for. We'd love to hear your response and reactions to this video, any ideas you have for future topics, whether it's related to this one or otherwise. And don't forget to hit that like if you enjoy what you heard today. If you'd like to hear more, hit that subscribe button. You can even hit the bell if you want to be notified when a new video hits. And I just want to say thanks again for taking your time to watch this video, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.